Good morning and welcome to Scotland Speaks at our usual time of 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning here in the studio in Glasgow. This week we're going to be looking at the Scottish Parliamentary elections of 2026 as we continue a series of discussions about the importance of that list vote and ensuring a nationalist majority in 2026. But this week, for a moment, let's turn back to last week's show on Scotland's housing crisis, when we discussed the situation that's raging across Scotland in that respect with the excellent Nick Jury and Laura Jones. Here's some of what they had to say.
Well, there's a big crisis. Everyone's accepted that. The government itself has said there's a housing emergency. And so tackling that it takes in many different forms. But starting with Alec Neil's paper in 2021, at the time he was calling for 100,000 public homes. And that has subsequently been found to be a shortfall. Recently he's changed his tune to saying 200,000 public homes, and that's certainly what the working group is discussing. But obviously, how do we get there? We will need the powers of independence to build that many homes. But in the meantime, there's work to be done. He recently published another paper, How Do We Address the Housing Emergency? And the STO, in fact, hosted a meeting with him. And I was pleased to attend, where he said that you could leverage around £20 billion of pension capital with, it must be said, less interest rates than on the borrowing than from the Debt Management Office. So effectively cheaper borrowing for local authorities, in which we could double the amount of public homes that we're currently constructing, and using the likes of the Newtown Development Corporation model, sell homes through a national house building company and use that to fund even greater amounts of social housing. And we could do that here and now. We don't need independence for that. It's just a question of political will. And I think we need to inject that into the body politic. We need action now, not a big boy did it and run away.
What is the current situation? What are the stories that you're hearing?
Well, I mean, the current situation legally is actually that the councils have an obligation, a legal obligation, to provide people with emergency temporary accommodation at the point that they apply as homeless, if they are deemed to be unintentionally homeless, which is usually the case. The problem is that obviously if you have a statutory obligation to provide housing, that means safe housing. That means housing that you're not getting attacked, obviously. So there's no obligation currently for it to be single sex. But what we're saying is that actually if you take these women's rights into consideration, the actual needs that they have and the real result of actually depriving them of single sex accommodation, you are actually putting people in danger of attack, sexual attacks and potentially death, because the death rate among women in these places is almost 3 times as high as among men, which I think is because women self-exclude from these services to such an extent, because they hear the stories of women being raped, attacked and solicited for sex. There's also a lot of guys hang around outside these places trying to pick off vulnerable women and exploit them. So women self-exclude from these services. So that's why we're seeing so few women actually registering as homeless and actually staying in the accommodation. So once it actually gets out there that we have safe accommodation, this is a much, much bigger issue than we think. There are many, many women that are staying in dangerous or dodgy situations because they know that there isn't a safe place for them.
And now to your comments on that show. James says, brilliant again folks and an eye-opener, great show and full of enlightenment. SN says, your videos are always interesting. Harold said, if only the SNP would tackle these real world problems on our doorstep. The billions the Scottish Government has wasted on stupidity would have built 100,000 new council houses. I think you might find many people in agreement with you there. And now to this week's show and discussions on political strategy leading up to the 2026 elections and how to ensure a nationalist majority. It's certainly what everyone is talking about, particularly with the rise of reform. So after the break, I'm delighted to be interviewing Jim Eadie, the newly appointed Director of Communications and Strategy at the Alba Party. Join us then. Welcome back to Scotland Speaks, where I'm delighted to be joined by the former MSP for Edinburgh Southern, Jim Eadie, and he is the newly appointed Director of Communications and Strategy at the Alba Party. Welcome, Jim.
Great to be here.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Now, we've been doing a series of shows of late, focusing on the Alba Party and our plans for 2026, the strategy for maximising the vote for independence in what we're terming an independence election. And we both know before Alex passed, he spoke of the importance of conveying a very specific message about the 2026 elections and what needed to be done to make sure we had a parliament that was going to take us to independence, hence your role. Do you want to tell us a bit about your plans for that?
So, I mean, as you know, Alec was the master strategist and master tactician and was already making plans for the 2026 election. So I think what the role involves is very much building on Alec's work and the work that he would want us to take forward in advance of the 2026 election. And that is to use the election, as you say, as the independence election, the opportunity to fight the election in order to seek a mandate for independence. And in order to do that, we need to maximise the pro-independence vote on the list vote. We need to make sure that people understand how that works and to understand that however they vote in the constituency, if they vote SNP on the list, they will be wasting their vote. In 6 out of the 8 regions at the last Holyrood election, hundreds of thousands of votes were piled up for the SNP on the list vote, and yet no SNP MSPs were elected in any of those regions.
On that note, actually, Jim, let's just cut to film that's been created by Robert Reid and Callum Ansell at Alba Party headquarters. It explains that voting system.
Here's how the Scottish elections work in 2 minutes. Scotland is split up into 8 regions. Each region has around 9 local constituency MSPs that you vote for using your lilac-coloured ballot paper. This vote is simple. The candidate with the highest vote in each constituency wins the seat. Each region then has to elect another 7 MSPs on what's called the regional list. These 7 are elected using your peach-coloured ballot paper. Here you vote for one party. Each party's votes are counted up and then they are divided by the number of seats that party has already won, plus 1. For example, in 2021, the SNP won 9 constituency seats in the North East. The 148,000 votes they got on the regional list were divided by 10, giving them just under 15,000 votes. The other 133,000 votes were wasted. This meant the SNP did not win a single seat on the regional list in the North East of Scotland. Despite getting the most votes in every region, the SNP only won 2 of 56 regional list seats up for grabs, with unionist parties picking up 46 of them. If, however, SNP voters had decided to back Alba on the regional list instead, the 46 seats won by unionist parties would have been cut to 24. The SNP would have sacrificed just 2 single seats, and in return, the second largest party would have been the pro-independence Alba Party with 30 seats. It would have been an independence supermajority in the Scottish Parliament. In 2026, don't waste your vote. Vote Alba on the regional list.
That, of course, Jim, explains exceptionally well. And the added element this time, of course, differing from 2021, is a rise of reform. Because how people vote will depend very much on the number of MSPs reform are going to get.
That's right, and I think the thing which Alec had very much in his mind was that we had to use the list vote in order to maximise the number of pro-independence MSPs in the Parliament. And our message has to be very clear to people in Scotland that if you want to kick the system, but you believe in independence, then you have to give your vote to the Alba Party on the list. However you vote in the constituency, if you want to achieve the pro-independence majority, you have to vote for Alba on the list. If you want to ensure that that Parliament has a pro-independence majority, a supermajority as Alec characterised it, if you want to build on Alec's legacy, where he was seeking to create a more prosperous and just society in Scotland, then you have to vote for Alba on the list.
Now, of course, Alba Party's Deputy Leader Neil Hanvey coined a very good phrase: the only reform Scotland needs is independence. And it is a great form, because you touched upon the fact that people are angry, looking for change. But the question is, what will that change look like? And of course, if people are looking for an independent Scotland, we're saying, well, if you waste that list vote, the chances are the Unionists are going to pick up all of those seats.
That's right. So we found in 2021 that hundreds of thousands of votes were piled high for the SNP in 6 out of the 8 regions in Scotland, and they delivered 0 SNP MSPs, 0, nada, zilch. That's what voting SNP on the list will mean in 2026. And if you want a pro-independence MSP, if you want to maximise the yes on the list vote, you have to vote for Alba on the list. That is the only way we can guarantee an independence majority in the Scottish Parliament following the 2026 election, is if people use their list vote wisely and they use it on behalf, they use it to vote for the Alba Party and not for the SNP, because an SNP vote will be a wasted vote.
You, of course, are Director of Communications and Strategy, but following on very much from the strategy that Alex had put in place for us. And there are 2 elements to this, of course. Yes, voting Alba on the list for that election, but also ensuring that the public are aware what that vote means, because arguably, if you're a nationalist in Scotland, you'll be saying, well, I keep voting for independence, I keep giving the mandate and using my vote to get that, but nothing ever happens. But what are we saying? What is Alba saying about what that vote actually means in real terms?
So what Alba's saying is that the list vote is absolutely critical to delivering the independence majority in the Scottish Parliament. But it's also critical that if you want to see action on independence, if you want to keep the SNP honest, both on independence and on competency within government, as Alec demonstrated when he was First Minister, then you have to vote for Alba on the list. That will keep the SNP on track, both in terms of independence and in terms of policy delivery over the issues that still matter to the people of Scotland and on which they rightly look to see progress on, short of independence being achieved. But I think also we need to be very clear about what the policy differentiators are between Alba and the other parties, both pro-independence parties and the unionist parties, and that is that we need to have control over our massive energy resources in Scotland. There's the old adage that if fool me once, shame on you; fool me twice, shame on me. We cannot allow the mistakes of the 70s, where £60 billion of tax revenues poured into the UK Treasury from North Sea oil over the period that Thatcher was the Prime Minister. Now, in current prices, that would be in excess of £200 billion. That money was lost to Scotland when it could have been invested in our public services, it could have been invested in improving infrastructure in Scotland, and it could have been invested in tackling poverty and inequality and creating the kind of society that we want to see. So we can't repeat that mistake again, and we can't see the renewable energy bounty that lies off our shores being squandered in the way that our oil revenues were by Westminster. And we know that between now and 2030, 124 billion kilowatt hours of energy, that's enough to power Scotland's homes 12.5 times over, will leave Scotland with no corresponding benefit, either in terms of tax revenues or in terms of jobs, direct jobs or supply chain jobs coming to Scotland. Now, independence is the answer to all of that, and we have to talk about independence, of course, and about how we achieve that, about how we prioritise that, but we need to link independence back to the social and economic situation that Scotland finds itself in. The fact that we are powerless to save our only oil refinery, the only oil producing country in the world not to have its own oil refining capacity, that has gone because we are not independent, because these vital decisions are taken by Westminster rather than being taken here in Scotland. So for all of those reasons, we need to communicate to people across the country that their list vote for the SNP will be a wasted vote, and that if they want to see progress on independence, and if they want to see Scotland achieve independence, and to achieve that independence mandate and to supercharge the independence mandate, then it has to be a vote for Alba on the list.
Of course, that's one part of the strategic direction of Alba. But of course, the other part is to be very clear to the electorate what that vote means. We are asking other independent supporting parties to agree with us that that vote should be indicative of public support for independence. Because if you're seeking to deliver independence, then we say that second vote should be treated as the vote for independence, because in the absence of a referendum, this is the next electoral test for the people of Scotland. This will be demonstrable of the polling that we can see that shows yes ahead. It's an opportunity for people to use that vote to indicate their support for independence, and we say that should be the mandate for independence. And I know that our party leader, Ken McCaskill, has written to other party leaders to ask them to come to the table and discuss such matters. What response has he had?
Well, the immediate response of the Greens was to rule out Kenny's very sensible suggestion that the pro-independence parties should meet to discuss what their strategy is going into the election.
Is that because independence, I mean, it's not a red line for them? We understand they'd be happy to go into coalition with the Labour Party.
Well, that is certainly the case, but it's also the case that the Greens continue to misrepresent ALBA as being some kind of toxic socially conservative party, when in fact we are very much a social democratic party in the left of centre tradition, which the SNP used to occupy and which ALBA now occupies in Scotland. The SNP leader and First Minister John Swinney was also written to as the leader of the largest pro-independence party, and while that letter communication has been acknowledged by his office, we've yet to see a reply from him. But you're absolutely right in terms of the strategy is to seek an independence mandate at every election, because the independence support, which remains high at around the 50% mark in Scotland, and in some polls exceeds 50%, is disappointed at the lack of progress and at the explanation for that from the SNP, which is that Westminster has denied an independence referendum, therefore no further progress can be made. And what ALBA is saying very clearly is that the referendum is not the gold standard. It never was. The electoral test is any national election, be it a Scottish parliamentary election or a UK Westminster election. And in the Scottish Parliament election next year, the mandate that we seek is for a majority of votes on the list for pro-independence parties. And in fact, when the ALBA party was contesting the 21 election, although we didn't make the breakthrough in Parliament that we sought at that time, the list vote that we achieved actually got the pro-independence vote over the line on the second list vote, and it was because of ALBA's contribution, albeit a small contribution at that stage. We hope a larger and bigger contribution at the coming election. ALBA votes actually delivered the independence mandate at the 21 election, and the independence vote and independence supporting MSPs can deliver the independence mandate at the coming election.
Now, we should say that Colette Walker, leader of the ISP, responded immediately in positive terms, which was very good to see. And if you are really looking for independence for your country, why do you think the other parties are not immediately coming around the table to see how to deliver that? Because Better Together got together. Why can't the independent supporting parties do so? What do you think the reason is for that?
Well, I think we remain optimistic that those who believe in independence will ultimately see the benefit and the value in cooperating with other pro-independence parties. I think we will, for the moment, give the SNP as the largest independence supporting party the benefit of the doubt, but I think it will be instructive as to their future intentions, whether or not they're willing to engage positively and constructively in the discussion that needs to take place. Because ultimately what you would want is to have all of the pro-independence parties agreeing on a form of wording that appears in their manifestos, which recognises that the list vote is the measure of whether or not Scotland wants to be independent or not, and that if there's a majority of votes cast on the list for pro-independence parties, that will represent a mandate for Scottish independence.
Of course, polling has changed, because it was the case that support for Yes was lower than support for the SNP, but now the tables have completely turned and support for Yes is higher than for the SNP, so it's surely a matter of common sense for the SNP to come round the table, and I'm going to take from you the hope and anticipation that John Swinney may indeed respond to Kenny's letter.
Absolutely, I think that's the key message for the independence family, if you like, those in Scotland who believe in independence, is that the SNP is by far and the way that the largest pro-independence party, but they're not the only pro-independence party, and there is, as you rightly say, a gap that has opened up between those who believe in independence and those who are prepared to vote for the SNP. And I think that is much more in keeping with how people vote in other European countries with a proportional electoral system. So we see in Catalonia that there's a range of political parties that stand on a pro-independence ticket, not just one monolithic party which supports independence. And of course, historically, the reason why there's only been one political party is because prior to the Scottish Parliament being established, Westminster elections were and continue to be operated on the first past the post electoral system. So it's very difficult to have a range of parties breaking through under that electoral system, but it's entirely possible, as the Greens have shown on the second vote, for other parties to break through on the list. And that's what ALBA is seeking to do, and that is what ALBA will achieve if enough independence supporters back ALBA on the list in 2026.
After the break, we'll turn to a more in-depth analysis of some of ALBA Party's policy offerings, because, of course, independence is our raison d'etre. But once we get there, or even in the process to getting there, clearly there needs to be some change in policy to work better for the people of Scotland. So we shall see you, Jim, and you all after the break.
Water is life, but not all water is equal. Our water ionizer restructures and alkalizes water for optimum hydration and detoxification, recreating the planet's ultimate water sources, found in lightning-struck lakes and newly melted icebergs. H2 Pure Source. Change your water. Change your life.
Welcome back to Scotland Speaks, where I'm delighted to be joined by the former MSP for Edinburgh Southern and the Director of Comms and Strategy for the ALBA Party, Jim Eadie. Jim, let's turn to what this election in 2026 is going to be about for the people of Scotland. What are the most pressing issues? Because what we do know, and I know you chap doors like I do, Jim, in by-elections, people are, let's use the great Scottish word, scunnered. They think it's pointless coming out to vote, and they think people aren't listening to them anymore. Politicians aren't listening. What is going to be necessary to draw those people out to engage in the election, and what are they looking for parties to deliver for them?
Well, I think there's a real danger at the Scottish parliamentary election that we could have the lowest turnout that we've ever seen in a Scottish Parliament election, because people are disillusioned. Those who had previously voted SNP, who gave the Labour Party their vote at the UK election in order to get the Tories out, perfectly understandable sentiment, are absolutely scunnered, as you say, at the lack of delivery from the Labour government in Westminster. The failure to deliver for WASPy women, the removal of the winter fuel allowance for pensioners, the failure right across the board to do anything meaningful for working people and their families, and the failure to understand what the role of a Labour government or social democratic government should be on behalf of the people. So I think there's huge disillusionment within society, and we need to appeal to people. What are the two most powerful messages in any election? One of them is it's time for change, and that was very effective for Labour in 24. But as Alba warned at that election, it would be Chino, change in name only. And in actual fact, it's not just been change in name only, it's actually been a reversal in terms of the policy prospectus that they've taken forward, which has been damaging to people in this country. So Alba has to somehow find a way of engaging with people that will offer them hope and optimism, that things can actually get better, that their lives can get better, that there are things which an independent Scotland could do, or a Scottish Parliament, short of independence, could do that would improve their lives. And that was very much Alec's approach. Alec believed that if we could raise the esteem of the Parliament in the eyes of the people, and run the shop competently over the range of policies that the Parliament had responsibility for, then people might then have the confidence to support independence, knowing that we could run a devolved Scotland competently and well, and deliver for the people across a range of policies like tuition fees, prescription charges, delivering infrastructure projects like the fourth crossing on time and within budget. If you could do that with the limited powers of devolution, what more could we do with the unlimited powers of independence? So I think that we have to return to that, and I think that the election next year gives us the opportunity to do that.
You mentioned esteem, and that's very important, because when Alex took office in 2007 as First Minister, he immediately changed from Scottish Executive to Scottish Government, so that people would feel that these people were in charge, and Scotland meant business and in her own right, and that was hugely successful. Do you think over a period of time, Jim, and particularly the past 5 years, when it seems people have begun to question some of what is happening inside the Scottish Parliament, the level of participation by some sitting within it, some of the policies that have been coming out of it, do you think that the reputation has been, after 25 years, affected, and is it redeemable?
I think that the Parliament's reputation has taken a knock. I think it was Susan Deakin, former Health Minister, who said on the anniversary of devolution, the 25th anniversary of devolution, that a capability gap had opened up within the Parliament, and that was a very strong indication in what was quite diplomatic language that the Parliament was not performing as well as it had done in the past, or as well as it should be on behalf of the people that they are meant to represent. And I think there's definitely a sense that many of the MSPs in each of the parties are nodding dogs for their front benches, that they don't actually subject the government, in the case of SNP backbenchers, with some honourable exceptions, like Fergus Ewing and Michelle Thompson and others, who have not been afraid to
and Ash Regan, of course.
And Ash Regan, well, as a backbench SNP MSP and now an Alba representative, doing a sterling job in the Scottish Parliament. But with those honourable exceptions not being the rule, what we find is that MSPs, in order to further their careers, in order to have increase their prospects of becoming ministers, are not actually standing up on behalf of their constituents in many cases, and that's just not good enough, and that does reflect on the reputation of the Parliament. But I think you're right, it can be redeemed, but we need to get the adults back in the room. We need to get a strong group of Alba MSPs in Holyrood who can be the constructive critics for the SNP, working with them when we are able to do so, but challenging them when we need to do so.
Use the phrase getting the adults back in the room, and Alex would say it is time to get the adults back in the room, and that's because the reputation of the Scottish Parliament meant so much to him, because he understood, of course, that if you have a Scottish Parliament that's working well and and drafting and creating good legislation that has positive impact on lives, then people have greater respect for their parliament. You mentioned, Jim, a concern shared by us all about engagement in this 2026 election. How are we going to get people to exercise that, certainly in the case of women, hard fought for and hard won vote? And is it a case that maybe, as we wish to do, that the framing of the election needs to change? It needs to be about something much more than who the next government is going to be and who the majority is going to be, but about independence.
I think that's right. I think while the future government of Scotland, the future governance of Scotland is vitally important, what we've got is an opportunity to make this the independence election, to tell people that if they get out and vote, they can actually achieve independence at this election, and that will be transformative for the country, for their lives, for the communities in which they live, for the country that we all want to see prosper and grow over the coming years and decades. And that's what the election can be about, but it requires the pro-independence parties to unite on a joint platform which says that the majority of votes cast on the list will be a mandate for independence. And if the parties come together and say that in unison with one voice, then that has the opportunity to galvanise those in the country who we know want independence, but in recent years, as you rightly say, have not been voting for pro-independence parties like the SNP because they have lost confidence in their ability to govern effectively and competently, but also in their ability to deliver independence for the people of Scotland, even when they have a majority of MPs at Westminster and a pro-independence majority in the Scottish Parliament in Holyrood.
Of course, Jim, you've been doing this communications job for a long time. You started way back in the SNP at Westminster. I'm just wondering how we changed the message from all of those years ago to now.
It's an interesting one. I mean, I was very privileged to work for a very small SNP parliamentary group back in the day, Margaret Ewing, Alex Salmond, Andrew Welsh.
What day are we talking about? What year are we talking
about? The very late 80s and early to mid 90s. So that's where I cut my political teeth and went on to do some would argue greater and better things. But my career came full circle when I then went to work for Neil Hanvey and Kenny McCaskill as the ALBA MPs in Westminster. And I don't think I'm being immodest if I say that on occasion we were able to run rings around a very much larger SNP group because we'd been round the block a few times before and we'd learned from some of the best operators in Scottish politics, you know, as I say, Alec, Margaret, Jim Sillars and others who were part of that small but very effective group that punched above its weight in Westminster. And I think those guerrilla tactics of being a small party but using the platform to get your view across and challenging the Westminster establishment when it was necessary to do that is something that the SNP probably have to return to now that they're a much smaller group at Westminster.
Policy development is very important, and of course within ALBA Party we have a number of national assemblies, a number of working groups looking to develop policy. I'm speaking about this in terms of what a manifesto might look like and how one is drafted. How important is it to engage with the grassroots of the party through these national assemblies, which invite other experts in who are not necessarily political but have experience? How important is that wealth of experience in engaging beyond our own party in ensuring that we are able to draft and come up with the best policies and ideas, which seem to be greatly lacking?
Well, I think you make a very good point there. I think one of the things which is very beneficial, as you say, is bringing in outside expertise, which the party can discuss individual policy areas till the cows come home, but will it actually work in practice? And that's where road testing the policies with experts who understand the area that they work within can be very, very useful to a party like ALBA. And sometimes the most flattering thing is for other parties to steal your policies, and that has happened on occasion. So that's probably a good indication that the ALBA party is getting it right in certain areas. So we've been very much banging the drum about increasing the Scottish child payment, and the Scottish Government have introduced that and have caught up with what we've been saying on that particular policy, and on free school meals as well, extending that to cover more children in Scotland who would benefit from it. That again has been an Alba Party policy, which Ash Regan has been able to take forward in the Scottish Parliament in the budget negotiations that she's had with the Scottish Government. But I think the party has its own internal processes for developing policy, National Council, National Assembly, getting that input from experts, as you say, then adopting the policy as it's developed at National Conference and Council. And I think out of that will come some very interesting policies and policy offerings that we will present to the Scottish people at the election. I think we'll have some very interesting and innovative and exciting things to say that will cut through and resonate with the people of Scotland, whether it be that on health, education, transport, infrastructure, and so on. I mean, some of the policies will be reinvigorated from 21. Our policy for a Scottish National Housing Corporation in order to leverage in massive investment from pension funds, which can unlock the kind of investment that we need to be making both into housing and social housing in Scotland, where there is a demonstrable need for greater housing provision. That will certainly be one of our policies, I'm sure. The 5-point plan for tackling family poverty and child poverty is again something that we will probably want to revisit. But there'll also be some new things. I don't want to get to declare all of our manifesto on Scotland Speaks just yet, but you can be guaranteed to be the first to know when we have something exciting and interesting to say in the run-up to the 26th election.
And feeding into that, of course, will be the conversations on the doorsteps, because listening to people is the most important part of the exercise to make sure that you are developing policies that fix the problems that they're facing on an everyday basis.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because it's important for politicians and for political parties not just to tell the people what should happen, but to listen to what they're saying and then to reflect that in what we offer back to the people at the election. And I think it's also really important in terms of our strategy and communications that we do three things. We need to obviously refine our messages. So out of the very detailed policies and the costed policies that we will produce, we need to refine those into key messages which we can then communicate to the public, so that when Alba Party members and supporters are having their own conversations, their own meaningful conversations with their family, with their friends, and with their neighbours, with their work colleagues, that they're able to get that message across. So refining the message on the back of the policies that we develop is very important. The other thing that's very important, of course, is increasing our visibility and our media coverage. And in the current day and age, the mainstream media are still important, but they're not as important. There's alternative media, there's social media, there's a whole range of platforms where we need to be communicating. But what is very interesting about that is that we have democratised the media. It's no longer the case that you need to have very deep pockets and a lot of money to spend in order to get your message across. You can do, as others have done, craft and create and refine a message, and then use a variety of media outlets that are available to you to get that message across. I think the third point, and probably the most crucial point, is we need to empower our members. We need to give them the ability and the resources and the information to create their own media, to put out their own social media posts, to make their own videos about why they're voting for Alba and why it's essential that people should vote for Alba on the list at the coming election. And we need to recruit a grassroots army of activists and of supporters who are willing to declare for Alba. And I think many of those, the closer we get to the election, will be people who are SNP supporters, people who are voting for the SNP on their constituency ballot, but who are determined to maximise the yes vote at the election. They're determined to have an independence majority in that parliament, and that know that the only way to achieve that is to give their list vote to Alba at the election.
Thank you very much, Jim. You've encapsulated in those 3 points what we can look forward to from you in the coming months leading up to the election. Just in closing, how important is the 2026 election from the perspective of Scotland not losing control of all of our assets? It's all whittled away before we have the chance to carve out our own future with what belongs to us.
I think this is a really crucial election for Scotland. It may actually be the most important election in Scotland's history, which makes it all the sadder that we don't have Alec with us to lead us through the election campaign. But I think this is about Scotland and whether Scotland wants to take control over our own affairs whether we want to seize control, because we are a sovereign nation. We have the ability to become independent if we believe in ourselves, as Alec did, and if we assert our right to self-determination, our right to be an independent nation at the election. That is the opportunity we have, and the alternative to that is to continue to allow Westminster to take control over all of the policy levers that affect us, to have nuclear weapons foisted upon us against our will, to have all of our massive energy resources, fossil fuels and renewables, which, as I've said earlier, in terms of offshore renewables, the amount of energy that has been taken out of Scotland and given directly to households south of the border and to companies south of the border is enough to power Scotland 12.5 times over. That is what will happen if we continue to allow Westminster to govern Scotland. The alternative is for us to become an independent country and to take control over all of the areas of responsibility that impact on our lives. And if we do that, we can become the fairer and more prosperous country that Alec Salmond dedicated his life to achieving.
So vote wisely, vote strategically, and vote for independence next year. Jim Eadie, thank you very much for joining me on Scotland Speaks. And with that, we come to the end of this week's show, which I do hope you have enjoyed. Please do write to me with your messages, thoughts for future programmes. I very much look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again next week. Bye-bye for now.